Hello, everyone. Thank you again. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is David James. I am the head of projects at at Prostate Cancer Research. And welcome to our very first webinar in our new Living Well with Prostate Cancer series. I'm going to begin quickly. I'm just going to give you a quick sort of 2 minutes for those of you who don't know who Prostate Cancer Research are. And then I'm going to hand over to our esteemed guest who is going to lead you on a very interesting presentation today. So, for those of you who don't know who Prostate Cancer Research are, we are a medical research focused charity that is focused on the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of advanced prostate cancer and better quality of life outcomes for patients. From London through to Oxford, Cambridge to Cardiff, Norwich, right up to Aberdeen, we're very proud to fund 15 high quality, innovative projects all across the UK with a shared aim of developing breakthroughs and breakthrough treatments so that we can one day live in a world where people are free from the impact of prostate cancer. Now, some of our more innovative and cutting-edge projects include some where our scientists are trying to use our natural immune systems to destroy prostate cancer, or another where our scientists are really delving into a protein which should stop cancer from growing, in the hopes that we can essentially find a new off switch for prostate cancer. But we also have projects focused on existing treatments as well, such as radiotherapy and hormone therapy. And our scientists are working to see how we can reduce the side effects and ultimately ensure better outcomes for people affected by prostate cancer. But beyond our research, we're also dedicated to educating, empowering, and supporting our patient, partner, family, and carer communities. That is why we've launched this webinar series, Living Well with Prostate Cancer, in collaboration with our good friends Tackle Prostate Cancer, the UK's National Federation of Prostate Cancer Patient Support Groups. This series, which runs until January, will encompass a whole variety of topics that you have told us that you want more support on. Each month, we will bring you experts in each subject matter to give a talk before opening up the session to answer any questions you may have. I really hope you find these sessions useful and informative and join as many of our future ones as you can. I'd also like to say a big thank you to the charity Penny Brawn UK, who have kindly agreed to lead the 4 sessions we have lined up for you in August as part of our Whole Life Approach Month. So now just a quick few basic housekeeping points before we get started. This Zoom webinar is a little different to Zoom meetings that many of us are familiar with. Everyone who's attending automatically has their videos and microphones muted. So during the first part of today's session, we won't be allowing questions, but we'll be asking you to vote on some polls and we will guide you through that as we go along. However, after the presentation is done, we're then going to open up to questions and have set aside approximately 30 minutes to answer as many of your questions as we can. If you do have any questions that you think of during the presentation, feel free to type them in the Q&A section on the panel on your device. And that will then come to us, and then we can make sure that we answer those at the end. When we do open up to Q&A, there are 2 ways you can ask a question. Either you can click the raise your hand button, and then when it's your turn, you'll be unmuted and you'll be allowed to talk and ask your question. Or alternatively, you can just type your question in the Q&A panel, and we'll be able to sort of choose those questions. If you type your question in the Q&A panel, you'll be able to do that anonymously if you like. But if you raise your hand, your name will be visible to other attendees. Please note finally that this session is being recorded. So if you don't wish to be recorded during the Q&A session, then please, as I mentioned, type your question and choose to ask your question anonymously. Now, with all that out of the way, it's my very great pleasure to hand over to our presenter today, Dr. Catherine Zollman, the medical lead at Penny Brawn UK. Dr. Zollman, over to you.
David, I think I need your permission to put my video on.
Sorry about that. That worked?
That looks like it's worked. Yes, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, David, for inviting me and Penny Bron to take part in this exciting series of events aimed at helping people living with advanced prostate cancer or affected by prostate cancer to live better and feel more empowered about what they're doing. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen, if that's okay. Let me just get myself organized. Oops, that's not what I wanted to share. Let me just get back to my, see whether I can share that now. Okay. So just a quick introduction to me. I'm Dr. Catherine Zollman. I'm medical lead at Penny Bron UK. I'm also an honorary lecturer at the University of Bristol in the medical school there, and I'm an NHS GP with a special interest in cancer. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about whole person resilience after diagnosis of prostate cancer, and really bringing in what we call an integrative approach. And I don't want to confuse things by using too many different terms, but in my mind, creating and helping people to build resilience in their whole life, using their whole person and all aspects of what it is that makes them up as an individual, is really another way of describing this term that's probably more familiar to audiences in maybe the United States and in Europe than necessarily here in Britain. But this idea of an integrative approach to healthcare, which means combining the best of conventional medicine with, alongside, important lifestyle modalities, things like how we can use nutrition, how we can use physical activity, how we can use stress management, relaxation, mindfulness techniques to harness the power of the mind over our bodies, and how we can also integrate those lifestyle approaches with some of the best and most evidence-informed complementary therapies, so that we get this expanded toolbox of things that we can use to help us as we move forwards in any sort of health condition. But integrative oncology is particularly the use of these methods when we're talking about cancer. So what I'm going to be covering today is how and why lifestyle can make a difference in cancer, and also some of the complementary approaches that can be used to improve well-being, to reduce side effects both of the treatments but also symptoms of the prostate cancer itself, and ways in which these techniques can also reduce some of the risks of recurrence. We'll also be looking at some of the most evidence-based things that you can do alongside and after your standard prostate cancer treatment. And I really importantly want to introduce this field in a way that doesn't make you feel overwhelmed. There's sometimes when you open this kind of box and find out about all the things that can make a difference alongside standard treatment, it can be really difficult to know where to start, and it can feel like that, that your whole life could potentially be taken over by exploring new things, and that's really not what we want to do. We just want to open your eyes to the fact that there are a few things that can make a difference, and that actually choosing the best ones for you is a very individual approach, because there really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to all of this. So just a tiny bit, because the whole of August, as David said, is going to be covered by different staff members from Penny Bron, giving you insights into their various specialities. We take a very multidisciplinary approach at Penny Bron. It's a charity that has been in existence supporting people affected by cancer for 40 years. We aim to give trusted information, practical support, and a safe space for everyone affected by cancer to explore how this integrative, expanded toolbox could be useful for them, and what they can do to best mobilize the best kind of support for them in their unique individual situation. We were founded by two rather exceptional women. Penny Bron is the lady on the right, and the charity is named after her. She was a woman with breast cancer who decided back in the 80s that she needed more than medicine to help her live well with cancer, and really recognized in those days when there really wasn't very much at all in the way of holistic support for anybody affected by cancer, that she needed care for her mind, her emotions, her spirit and her heart and her soul. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So really quite far-sighted and forward-thinking, because now, as we know, everybody who is diagnosed with cancer is supposed to have a holistic needs assessment where it's not just the physical side of things that is important. And this was, Penny set up the charity really recognizing those needs way ahead of any more wider recognition that this was important. So really, I've mentioned in my title that resilience is one of the key words that we talk about at Penny Brohn, and that is now gaining acceptance as something that people can really benefit from. And I think it's important to have a definition of what do we mean by resilience. So the way I'm using it is the capacity to prepare for, to recover from, and to adapt in the face of any stress, challenge, or adversity. And really importantly, resilience isn't something that you're just born with or born without. It is something that you can learn to build, and we can all learn tools and techniques and be supported to build our capacity and sustain our energy. And it's a bit, I often think of resilience as a bit like the charge in our batteries. If your batteries are not very well charged, you'll find that things are going a bit sluggishly, the lights don't work, they don't shine as brightly, the motor doesn't go as fast, whatever it is that's powered by battery. If the charge is high, you're going to be getting the best function of whatever piece of equipment you're using. And in the same way, our bodies, minds, and spirits can function differently depending on our state of resilience. And I think this is a useful metaphor, and we use this a lot at Penny Brohn, this idea that we are all floating in our little boat of life, and that underneath the surface of the pools in which we're floating, there are rocks, and the rocks represent different challenges. And whether we bump into the rocks or not depends on two things. Obviously, how big and how many the rocks are, but really importantly also how high the water level is that might allow us to float over the rocks or to float between the rocks if there aren't too many of them. But you can imagine that if the water level drops in this little picture, we're going to start bumping into even some of the smaller rocks. So resilience can be thought of as either the sort of charge in our batteries or the amount of water in our tanks that allows us to float over or navigate more easily around some of life's challenges and adversities. And we'll come back to this idea of the boat and the rocks in a little bit. Now, at Penny Brohn, we use this whole person, what we call our Penny Brohn whole person model. And it really is, there's nothing rocket science about this, you'll see that there, but it's just a representation to remind people how interlocked and interdependent these different aspects of us are. How our bodies can't really function at their optimum if our minds, our emotions, and our spirits are out of kilter or are not feeling well nourished. And that around us, and the sort of individual bit of ourselves is in the purple here, but in the green circle around it are some of the things that really affect very much how we function as individuals, the relationships that we spend time in with our friends and family, the communities that we're part of, the environments where we live, and some of the practical things that we have to deal with, like finances or work. And so we encourage people to think of ourselves in this very holistic way when we're thinking, how can I do the best for myself? How can I really get to optimum health and well-being given my circumstances? And we do this because over the 40 years that we've been running, we have heard so many stories of how cancer affects the whole person. And I'm not going to read out this list, but many of you will probably identify with some of these different things that, yes, in the yellow arrow, there are the symptoms and side effects directly caused by the cancer, but cancer has all these other knock-on effects on us in terms of our whole person. I think looking at how it can affect us physically, but also how it can affect us mentally, emotionally, in the kind of what we call the spirit area, which I think maybe I'll spend just a minute unpacking that, because it's a bit of a word that kind of means different things to different people. And the way that I tend to use it is the sort of how we're feeling in the deepest bits of ourselves. What gives us meaning? What gives us a sense of purpose, a reason to get out of bed in the morning? What connects us to the things that really matter to us, to love, to a sense of things that might be bigger than ourselves, but also that might take take us out of ourselves, things like nature, music, those sorts of aspects. So it doesn't need to be anything that's kind of woo-woo. It doesn't need to be associated with any particular kind of faith, but I think we all have a sense of things when our spirit's feel in good shape, we're feeling strong, we're feeling nourished in the inner bits of our being, as it were, and we feel a sense of zest and sort of appreciation of life and gratitude. So that's what I mean by spirit. So you can see that a cancer diagnosis can have these wider impacts, and that if we're feeling any of these, they will definitely have an impact on how our bodies are working, how our bodies are feeling, but they will also be affecting us quite profoundly. And I think let's have a think about the impacts of cancer. You know, we know that this isn't just something that people report to us at Penny Bron. Big surveys, around a quarter of people living with or beyond cancer face long-term, what they would call long-term disability or poor health after their treatment. And almost half of people with cancer say that the emotional and psychological impacts are sometimes the hardest things that they feel they have to cope with. So, and we know that things that, you know, in terms of the practical side of things, 1 in 3 people have, you know, significant losses in earnings per month because their work is affected or they have to reduce their hours. So we can really see that these are widely accepted, that the impacts of cancer go well beyond the physical. But let's have a particular think about prostate cancer, because although I mentioned all those other things and just had one little line there for symptoms and side effects, actually in prostate cancer, these symptoms and side effects can be really quite life-affecting. And there's a long list there. Some of, you know, not everybody has all of these, not everybody has any of these, but these are certainly some of the common things that the treatment of prostate cancer can lead to in men living beyond a prostate cancer diagnosis. And we'll come back to how this expanded toolbox that I was talking about a little bit earlier, where we're combining conventional treatment approaches with lifestyle approaches and with some complementary therapy approaches, how that can give us a little bit of a better handle on some of these and maybe make us more able to manage some of these difficult side effects. So I just thought I'd stop there for a moment, and maybe if we could run the first poll. Do you think we could do that, David? So this is just a little quick survey of the audience, and it's totally anonymous, so please don't feel any hesitation. Just a rough straw poll of how prostate cancer may have affected your health and well-being. Sometimes cancer can affect things negatively, sometimes actually it can affect things positively. So there are 3 questions here that I just quickly wanted you to fill in, just to get a sense of how things are affecting you. And David, I think you can see the polls coming in, so feel free to stop the poll when we've got a good number of answers, and maybe if you could flash up the anonymized results, that'd be brilliant.
Absolutely. I think let's probably give about 2 minutes for people to complete it, and then we'll drop the results in the chat section as well.
Yeah, lovely. I think you can sometimes just get a quick bar chart that just shows them.
Fantastic.
And I do want to come back to this notion of, although we often think of cancer as a very negative thing that happens in people's lives, there are many stories where people can be helped to actually transform that negative into something where there can at least be some benefits. And we sometimes call that post-traumatic growth. That's the psychological term for that, sort of turning things around, what could look like a tragedy or a crisis, and how actually with the right support and the right approaches, sometimes some good can come out of those sorts of things. So that's be interesting to see how that has played out and whether that has played out in this audience. Do you think we're ready there?
Yeah, we just have quite a few more coming in, so let's give
okay. Yeah,
20 more seconds. I'll do a countdown.
Thank you.
So 10 more seconds, folks. No worries if you haven't taken part, as this is a thing. Okay, I am ending the poll in 3, 2, 1. I clicked share results. Are
Yes,
you able
absolutely. I can see them. So I don't know if hopefully other people can also see these results. So just to read out. So the most people felt a little less well overall since their diagnosis, but there was also a significant number of people feeling a lot less, much less well. A few people saying no difference, and then a small number of people 8% of people saying that they felt a little bit better. So, and then if there had been some negative changes, 69% of people said it was in the psychological and emotional side of things. 53% said it was physical side of things. 39% of people said in their relationships with families and friends. 19% of people said in their wider social interactions. 25% of people were affected practically, work, travel, those sorts of things. 44% of people were affected in their spirits, and a few people said, 6% of people said there was another aspect. Interestingly, 6% of people said there'd been no negative changes. So, and if there had been positive changes, the majority, interestingly, and again, this is something that we hear an awful lot, have been in their relationships with family and friends. Sometimes the support that kind of comes to you after a diagnosis of cancer can sometimes be incredibly affirming and lovely. So 39% of people said that things had improved in that sense. 19% of people said physical things had improved for them, and psychological and emotional things also 19%. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much. That's really, really interesting, and we can put those in the share those if people want to see those more widely. But that's very representative, I would say, of the general public out there. For most people, this ends up being a negative thing. The psychological and the emotional consequences are often under sort of explored and under supported. So I'm just going to share my slides again. Come back to this. So what can we do about that? So let's just. So the reason to talk about resilience is that when our resilience is high, we actually cope better and we experience fewer side effects. So paying attention to building your resilience may actually change some of those answers that you just gave. Our experience is at Penny-Bron, where we positively focus on people's resilience and use all sorts of strategies to help people build their resilience, is that at the end of a course or the end of an intervention with us, people often feel that their concerns have lessened, that they've been helped to deal with those sorts of things. And the great thing about this is that resilience can be built up in many different ways. And if we think about that tank of water, we can fill it up in different ways. So those people who were saying, I feel like my relationships and with my friends and family have improved, actually that is a way of building your resilience, and that will knock on to some of those other ways. So we can support ourselves using physical means, using mental and emotional means, actually through nourishing our spirits, but we can also use these wider connections. And as I said, if we feel that we're at rock bottom in all of these different areas and that we're bumping into the rocks, then actually just remembering how connected these things are, so that if we can get some emotional support from somebody, it's almost as if it kind of trickles through and starts to fill up some of the other aspects. So the delightful thing about this whole approach to building resilience is that there are many, many ways to fill that tank. There are many paths to it, and people can really be helped to choose the ones that are going to be most effective, but also easiest and most accessible for them. And there's no one best way to approach this. Anything that puts a little bit more water into any of these tanks will start to lift the whole boat. But there's also another really important aspect of resilience. It isn't just about helping us to feel better. When we're more resilient, our bodies actually function better, and they can rebalance, restore, and repair more effectively. Now, why is that important? This is another sort of whole aspect that I think people, when they're diagnosed with cancer, they are often not told about this really important aspect, which is that we all make cancer cells in our bodies all the time. As our cells in our body multiply and divide and repair themselves, they're turning over some of them several times a day. And, they say that at the end of 5 years, we've hardly got any of the original cells in our bodies that we had 5 years ago. All of our cells are constantly turning over and renewing to keep us fresh and healthy. And in that process of multiplying and dividing, some of the cells come off the production line faulty in a way that would allow them to develop into a cancer if they were left unchecked. So, the obvious question then is, if we all make cancer cells all the time, why don't we all get cancer? Well, it's because of this idea of the seed in the soil. So we might make cancer cells, but you can think of them like a seed. If the seed, whether a seed grows or not, is very dependent on what the seed is like, but also really importantly, where it falls and whether the conditions where it falls are likely to encourage it to grow or encourage it to just wither away and die. And so we can think of this idea of the seed and the soil, and we make cancer cells in our bodies all the time. But part of the soil is that we have a really brilliantly developed immune system, which is hardwired to detect and destroy those cancer cells. It's obviously a really important part of our evolutionary biology, because if we didn't have that, we would all get cancer right from the beginning. We'd have, as a species, we would never have survived. And it's not just humans, but all multicellular organisms have this capacity to develop abnormal cells, and for those abnormal cells to need to be detected and destroyed so that they don't take over. So I just want to very briefly introduce you to some of the white blood cells of your immune systems. Again, I think we should all learn about this in primary and secondary school, because it's such an important and fundamental concept about how our bodies can keep themselves well. And each of our immune cells is specialized for different defensive functions, but these natural killer cells, the ones bottom left, are the ones that are most specifically designed to detect and destroy cancer cells. And I just want to, hopefully this will work, I just want to play a short video of this system in action. So this is taken down a microscope. It shows that big round cell in the middle there is a cancer cell. The small, fast-moving cells are the body's white blood cells. And you can see that they are clubbing together, detecting and targeting that round cancer cell in a way that's going to kill it. There, next to the little arrow, is another cancer cell, and it's almost as if the white blood cells then can kind of pop it from the inside. And here is another cancer cell, and it's a team effort. The cells work together to detect and destroy and take out that cell. So we call this immune surveillance. It's happening in our bodies round the clock, 24/7, even more so when we're asleep, when we're resting, when we are in downtime or our rest, digest and restore mode, when our systems are doing their housekeeping function. But this is happening 24/7. And really what we're trying to say is that cancer will only develop when there is an imbalance between the amount of cancer cells that our bodies are producing and the number of cells that can be destroyed by our immune system. We're designed to keep ourselves in this fine balance where the immune cells have always got the upper hand. But like anything else, our immune systems need the right conditions to thrive. If we think about a plant, we know that we need to give it the right soil conditions, the right light conditions, the right amount of water for that plant to thrive. If we're thinking about our cars, we know we need to take it to be serviced the right amounts of time. We need to fill it up with the right fuel. We need to top up the right oil. We need to make sure the water levels are good, the tires are well balanced and in good condition. But we often know more about how to look after plants and cars than we do about our own bodies. So really, we need to think about what are the right conditions for our immune systems to thrive, because one of the factors that we know is that in the 21st century, the number of people getting cancer is increasing. And that's because our environments are tending to make our bodies produce more cancer cells. Now, partly that's because we're living longer, and as we get older, our bodies make more cancer cells, but there are a number of other sort of environmental factors that make it more likely for our bodies to produce cancer cells. So we need to be even more on the case with supporting our immune systems to kind of make sure that they're up for the job. So what are the right conditions for our immune system? Well, as I've mentioned, when our resilience is high, our bodies work better, and that includes our immune systems. So let's think about the different things that help us build our our resilience. And just before we do that, I want to just unpack some of the science around this, because it is really interesting. Each of our immune cells has these little, we call them receptors in biology, but they act like little switches on the surface. And the cells respond to cues in the body about how active they should be. Sometimes it's really important for our bodies to be able to shut down our immune function temporarily, because it takes quite a lot of energy. And if we need to save energy for something else, if we're in a kind of situation where we need to preserve our energy for an emergency, then we need to be able to shut down our systems. But in other situations, we might want to absolutely increase our immune function. So we now know that when we exercise, there are chemicals made in our body that clock on to the on switches and that wake up our immune systems. And next week, I think, or one of the weeks coming up in August, Alistair Burke, who's our physical activity lead at Penny Brohn, is going to talk to you much more about the actual effects of exercise. But one of the other things that we know that can happen is that when we're chronically stressed over, and chronic means kind of stressed over long periods of time in a way that's not enjoyable for us, sometimes we make then chemicals in our body that can actually suppress our immune systems and lock onto the off switches. So we can see that actually physically and chemically, there's an awful lot that we can do to regulate our immune systems. And if you want to find out a little bit more about this, I'd highly recommend these two books. The one on the left, AntiCancer Living, comes out of a big cancer center in the States. The Lorenzo Cohen and Alison Jeffries work at the MD Anderson Cancer Center. And the one on the right is written by Professor Rob Thomas, who's a British oncologist working in Cambridge and Bedford, who's written an awful lot about lifestyle and how to build resilience and how to keep yourself healthy after a cancer diagnosis. But basically, the things that they talk about in both those books are, that there are several common factors. And I think really, really importantly, this idea of taking control and thinking resiliently is kind of puts you on the front foot. If you are feeling a bit overwhelmed and like you are just a victim of cancer, evidence has shown that you are likely to feel less resilient, and that some of the things that we've talked about in terms of your body working well are not going to work so well. But if you can take control, and I would say that already by just turning up to this webinar, you are thinking resiliently and taking control. And I'm sure that there would be physiological changes that somebody could measure there just from the very act of trying to inform yourself, find out a bit more, join together with other people. You are sort of taking back a little bit of control. And we know that people in various situations who feel helpless and hopeless tend to have worse outcomes across the board. So even just by feeling like you're doing a little bit of something that might influence your outcomes for the better, you are going to be doing something really positive. And this idea of thinking resiliently means not exactly that, thinking about what can I do to make the best possible outcome a little bit more likely. And even if it's just a little bit more likely, or what can I do to make today a little bit of a better day, or even just the next 5 minutes, a little bit better of a 5 minutes. That's resilient thinking. And there's lots of really important research around this sort of positive psychology areas, which have shown that that's really helpful to help mobilize the body's repair, restore, rebalance. So apart from taking control, we've mentioned physical activity, and you'll hear more about that. I think you've got a whole week in September, whole month in September devoted to the role that food can play in building our resilience, reducing your stress and anxiety levels. And I know that Alan Stokes, who's our counselling lead and psychological support lead at Penny Brohn, is going to give you a whole session on this later. And looking after your emotional health. These are all things, positive ways that people can support the immune system. Really interesting how much science is now looking at the science and the benefits of sleep and rest, and getting those in adequate amounts and also adequate quality. And different people need different amounts, and but there is an awful lot that people can do to improve both those sides of things if that's an area where you feel like you might be a bit under-resourced or challenged. Managing troublesome physical symptoms is a really important one. And again, I love the fact that this broader toolbox helps us actually deal better with many troublesome physical symptoms. Because if you're in pain, or if your digestion isn't working well, or if you're troubled by hot flushes, or if your mood is affected by some ongoing kind of physical discomfort, that's going to drag your overall resilience down. And there are often so many things that we can do to help shift and improve things. Interestingly, attending to your environment. Sorry, I'm just going to have a sip of water there. There are so many things in our environment that can either make us feel more resilient or can drain us. And sometimes they're simple things like just getting outside for a bit of fresh air. We know the effect of sunshine on our bodies in terms of making vitamin D and how important that is, but also just an environment which makes you feel safe, which makes you feel comfortable, which is free from unnecessary pollutants or chemicals that your body might struggle to deal with. All of those sorts of things, they're important areas that are covered in both those books, because again, they can have an important impact. And really, really importantly, these networks of love and support, which is why I'm so delighted that in the poll there, a lot of you felt that those were things that were working better for you since your diagnosis, because again, research has shown how important those systems of connection are in terms of general longevity in the general population, but also in terms of immune function and immune support. And nourishing our spirits is also really important, and we can talk a bit more about that maybe in the questions and answers. So all of these things are common factors that the research supports are ways of building our resilience. And we don't all have to do all of them, but they're all there and available to us. And when people are spending time on these things, I think they shouldn't just feel that these are things to make them just feel a bit better. They actually will have physiological and physical benefits. So let's just, yeah, this is a tool that we use quite a lot at Penybron. We call it our health and wellbeing wheel. And it's just a way of mapping these different things. And we encourage people to fill it in for themselves by putting a dot in each of these different areas. I've put the link to the place on our website where you can do this and download it and do it as an exercise for yourself. We encourage people to join the dots so that they actually sort of make a bit of a shape, because it's not so important what any individual score is, but it's almost the sort of area in the shape as a whole that is a marker of your own individual resilience. And what we encourage people to do is say, look at the places where they're doing well and play to their strengths in those areas, and support the areas where they may be feeling a bit less well. So this might be the picture of somebody who maybe is in the middle of a course of chemotherapy. So they've got a number of physical symptoms. 0 near the center is the least resilient, and 6 right out the edges is the most resilient. And this can be a really useful way of sort of self-assessing the areas that you might need a bit more support or where you might want to focus, but also recognizing it is just a snapshot and it does change over time. And you can have a scan coming up which can provoke a lot of anxiety and make you score yourself much lower in the mind area, and then when you have the results of that scan it can change and you can feel relief and like that's a whole lift there. So this is a moving picture but can sometimes be really useful. So I just want to whiz through some of these different areas, and as I say, Alice is going to tell you much more about important aspects of physical activity, but really just to say that this is becoming now a real recognized element of what good cancer care should look like. That actually anybody with a diagnosis of cancer should be given support to find their own optimum levels of physical activity, both before treatment to get them in the best possible state for treatment, during treatment, really interestingly. And we used to just, I've worked in cancer for a long time, and I really remember the days when we just say, just go to bed, rest during your treatment. All you need is rest. But we now know that that's absolutely the wrong advice to be giving to people. You might need some rest, but the idea is that keeping you physically active in a way that is matched to your energy levels is a much better thing for us to be doing, and helps reduce side effects and improve the effectiveness of cancer treatments. So I know you'll have a whole session on that, so I won't carry on much more about that. I think the idea that nutritious and enjoyable food can play a part in managing side effects, also managing long-term outcomes and helping you build your resilience is now again really well established. Different people probably need different specific advice depending on all sorts of factors to do with themselves, to do with their treatment, to do with their cancers. But basically what we do know is that colourful vegetables and fruit and eating as whole food a diet as possible, with things as little processed, or where the processing takes as little goodness out of the food as possible, it seems to be the cornerstone for most. I love this little quote by Michael Pollan, who is an American writer who's written extensively on this, where he says, eat real food. And by that he means don't eat packaged things that are what he calls edible food-like substances, where your grandmother wouldn't recognize what the ingredients are because they mostly look like something out of a chemistry experiment. So eat food as close as it as nature sort of landed it on your plate as possible, not too much. Again, we know that obesity and overweight is a risk factor for many cancers and affects many cancer outcomes. So really the not too much is largely aimed at that kind of, particularly in the US, but in the UK here we're following suit, aimed at people who have a problem with overweight. Obviously, we know that there is also a group of people with cancer who are struggling with underweight, so the not too much wouldn't apply to them, and mostly plants. It doesn't need to be exclusively plants, but that kind of is a good motto. And the other three words that we use a lot at Penny Brown are colour, variety and moderation, because that keeps that balance on the plate, which is so important. And it should be enjoyable. You know, chocolate, red wine, they also contain really good things. I put a link to the Penny Brown healthy eating guidelines there, and as I said, I think next month you're going to get a whole series on food. I would just say that it's really important not to get stressed by food as well, and food is only one component of it. And some people, in our experience, have tended to just get so obsessed by eating exactly the right thing. And we often at Penny Brown talk about the 80-20 rule. If 80% of the time you can be eating in a way that is good for you, then we are designed to have treats as well. For feasts and high holidays have always been part of our social and biological sort of landscape. It's just when the balance tends to mean that those are things that we would eat all the time. So the idea that one would eat a McDonald's for every meal, that's when things start to get out of balance. So really, really important not to allow food or exercise or any of these things to tip into the place where it starts to become a stress and a burden for you. So how are we doing for time? Okay, so just wanting to mention again the idea of stress and anxiety levels and our emotional health. And this little diagram on the right just shows the different parts of the body that can be adversely affected when we are in a state of chronic stress. And there are so many important stress management techniques that we can learn and practice, that even if we can't change what's going on in our life and stressing us, we can really change how that stress is affecting us physically by practicing things like breathing, mindfulness, meditation, sometimes moving meditations like yoga, or even just gardening or listening to a piece of music. They can help us unwind, and that can be a really important thing that we can do. And I think managing your mindset and getting your whole approach to cancer so that it's not dominated by fear and anxiety, where you feel a bit in control. I love this quote by Sophie Savage: "I have cancer, cancer doesn't have me." And life has got to go on, and you are the center of that, and feeling like hopefully helping you feel that you're not a bit part in this, where it's the doctors and other people who are deciding on your future. Hopefully feeling that, helping you feel that you've got a central place right in the center of your health care and health creation team is really important. We've talked about mobilizing your networks of love and support and nourishing your spirits, and just how important that is, and how difficult it can sometimes be, and how isolating a diagnosis of cancer can be, and how people feel like they're suddenly not a member of all the sorts of groups that they were part of, or they don't want to bring everybody down with their stories and they put a mask on. And one of the things that we find at Penny Brown is actually getting people together to share experiences can be one of the most helpful things, where people realize it's not just them feeling that way, they're not going mad, they're not having an abnormal reaction to things, that everybody feels like this, and that there are things that you can do to build yourself back up again. And there are ways in which you can learn to talk to friends, talk to work colleagues, talk to family in a way which builds strength and builds relationships. So that's really important. So, I mean, ultimately what I'm trying to come back to is that there are many, many different integrative ways of building resilience. We sometimes call this our busy slide. It's got so many words on it, so many different things there. But it really is not designed so that you feel you have to do every single one of these. But hopefully there'll be some words on there that you can identify with, that you can feel inspired by and think, oh, actually, I would quite enjoy doing some of, paying attention to some of the important things in my life. I don't know, getting, contacting that old friend who I haven't spoken to for ages, getting my old, gardening tools out of the shed and doing something again, making something like I used to do, listening to some music that gives me a sense of, gives me some joy and reminds me of some good times. All of those sorts of things are important, and they're all very helpful ways, and you don't have to do all of them. Pardon me. But I have highlighted this managing symptoms thing, and wanted to come back again to the idea that people who've had treatment for prostate cancer do have a lot of difficult to manage symptoms, which can sometimes feel kind of they're lumped with, and you should feel grateful, we've cured your prostate cancer, or we're helping you live with your prostate cancer. The side effects just are a minor thing that you should just put up with and shut up. But actually they can really have very major and significant effects on your quality of life, on your relationships, on all sorts of things. And this is a big busy slide, and the recording of this will be available later, and we can maybe come back to this slide if people want to interrogate me about this a little bit more. But there are lots of things with this expanded toolbox that I've talked about that can really be helpful in terms of helping people manage. So for example, things like hot flushes, we know that lifestyle and particularly physical activity can make a big difference to how you experience those. There's also a lot of evidence around CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. So actually being taught to think differently about the flushes and to respond differently to the flushes, and sometimes that can be helped with hypnosis. There's a strong evidence base for how that can make a difference and make them much easier to live with. Things like acupuncture and ground flaxseed can have also been shown in research studies to make a difference. Two herbal preparations, black cohosh and St. John's wort, combined together have been shown to decrease the severity and frequency of hot flushes. But really importantly, and I did just want to highlight this, when you are taking herbal supplements or high dose nutritional supplements, it's always really important to check with your oncology pharmacy team, because some of these, and particularly St. John's wort, has got has got effects on changing the way other medicines are handled by the body. And so sometimes it might make a treatment that you're getting much less effective. It might make the body just get metabolize it and burn it off much more quickly, so that it can't have the beneficial effect in the body. And so we know that St. John's wort particularly is prone to do this. So always check interactions with the pharmacist if you're on ongoing medication that might have an interaction with these things. Really interestingly, in terms of erectile dysfunction, which is a very common problem after prostate cancer treatment, many men do respond to Viagra, but for some of the men who don't respond to Viagra, an interesting study showed that giving them a vitamin E supplement actually changed non-responders into responders. So again, that might be something that you want to discuss with your teams, and make sure again that if you're taking a supplement, you discuss it with your oncology teams. So I don't want to run through this whole list, but really the idea of this slide was just to open your eyes to the idea that there is often something that can be added or done. And many of these things, even though the evidence isn't necessarily so big that there'd be a published what we call a systematic review, where thousands and thousands of patient data is combined to give you a really strong evidence. The nice thing about these things is, as long as we're not talking about supplements, and as long as we're checking those carefully with the pharmacists, many of these things are very safe. So actually, even if there isn't a huge amount of evidence, often I think the safety means that you could just give them a try for something like acupuncture, as long as you go to a well-trained, insured practitioner who's experienced at working with cancer. You will probably know after 3 or 4 treatments whether acupuncture is helping you. If it doesn't help you, you haven't lost an awful lot. There's no dangerous long-term side effects. But if it does help you, it can be a way of ongoingly managing difficult symptoms. And the nice thing about complementary therapies is that they can often help in many different areas. So acupuncture can help with hot flushes, it can help with fatigue, it can help with sleep, it can help with pain, it can help with mood. So sometimes you hit lots of different buttons with one different therapy if it works for you. So these things are worth thinking about, are worth talking to maybe an integrative practitioner or an integrative doctor or an integrative nurse about if you're not sure where to start, or looking for a practitioner who is experienced in supporting people with cancer. And I think I would strongly say that these things can be used in what we would call this integrative way alongside conventional treatment. Sometimes that's also called complementary, so it's complementary to your standard treatment. But they can also sometimes be used in a way that is called alternative, where people are using these things instead of conventional treatment for their cancers. And I think that it's really important I think they've got a bad name for themselves because of that more alternative use, where a lot of doctors are quite worried about people turning down treatments that could be life-saving or that could be really helpful to try and find other ways of treating things, which often have got very little evidence base to say that they actually treat cancer. But when used in this more integrative complementary way, I think a lot of those risks are reduced, and we can all, as a whole team that includes your oncologist, includes your pharmacist, includes your nurse, but also includes your complementary practitioners. That's the ideal scenario where people are working together to support your health using the best combination of these evidence-informed approaches. So, how do we start then? Well, I'd say start with the low-hanging fruit. Start with the things that are easy for you, that you already know that you would enjoy, and that you would have maybe some support or some company doing it. You definitely don't have to do it all at once. And there are many small practical steps, and often just starting somewhere can start to make a big difference. And I would say choose things that are easy, enjoyable, affordable, realistic for you in your life at the moment. Sustainable. These things work much better if they become a part of everyday life and practice than if you're just doing a big burst of them one-off, get all very enthusiastic, and then you overdo it and you think, oh, I can't do that, I can't keep that up. So think about the sustainability. Think about the support from your families, friends, communities. We tend to stick with a new habit much, much better if we're doing it in a way that is supported by others. And just think, how could these work for you? That just because your neighbour's done something, just because somebody else in a prostate group has done something, just because something else worked for somebody, doesn't mean it's the right thing for you. So a lot of this is about taking back control and thinking, what am I enthusiastic about? What do I really think is going to help support me? And the nice thing about this resilience is that often you do get a feeling that I'm feeling better. I feel more energetic. I feel more constructive. I feel more resilient. And I would really encourage you to trust that sense of, if you're feeling better, almost certainly it's an indicator that your immune system and other systems in your body are functioning better. Nearly there. Oh, sorry. So yeah, I often think this idea of just picking one or two things that you think will sustain your resilience, that will actually increase that water level, and seeing how you could incorporate those one or two things in over the next week, and just think what might they be. And they might be things you're already doing, and just really giving yourselves a pat on the back and thinking, actually, I'm just going to keep doing those things that I know are good for me. It can also be helpful to identify if there's anything draining your resilience, and think how you might be able to minimize the effect of that, or make sure that if there is something draining, like, I don't know, I've got a scan coming up and I know I always get really anxious and can't sleep before a scan. Are there things that you could build in to kind of support that? Could you build in, some really good time with some friends, or could you build in an activity that you enjoy? Or could you really make sure that you are not taking on any extra stresses at that time, so that you're giving yourself the best chance of that drainer not having a big effect on you? So this is a tool that many people that I've spoken to find quite useful, identifying their sustainers and their drainers, and just honing it down to a couple that you might focus on. So if you're still not sure what to do and you want to get some more help, I would say that Penny Bron is a charity which is aimed at supporting people with any type of cancer. And so you are more than welcome to use our services. Since the beginning of lockdown last year, we've been offering all our services virtually and online, although we did just last month have our first in-person Wellbeing Day as a sort of experiment. But there's lots and lots of services available online that can help you sift through this maze of what could I do, where could I start. You can dip a toe in the water. We offer an awful lot of online group sessions. aimed at various aspects of that resilience that I've talked about, all sorts of different things. This is a kind of typical week of online services. So you can dial in via Zoom and take part. Many of them are do-along things where you'd actually be guided to do something physically activity-wise or qigong-wise or yoga-wise, but others of them are more discussions. Some of them are group discussions where you might actually, you'll have a chance to meet other people in similar situations. So there's lots going on. And for more personalised support, we do offer one-to-one telephone consultations with our integrative doctor team, with our counselling team, with our nutritional therapy team, with our exercise therapy team, and with our wellbeing consultants. So there's lots going on, and many different people who are experiencing challenges in all sorts of different ways have come and found them helpful. So I would just say, there's no barriers. All these services are offered on a donation basis only. We don't want anybody to feel excluded by lack of ability to pay. If you can make a donation, that's fantastic. But if not, there's no charge to register for these things. So it's maybe worth having a look at our website and seeing what's available if you do feel that would be useful. Many people actually don't need that specific support. All they need is just the encouragement to keep on doing the things that they've done. There's no reason why you need to join an activity class just for people with cancer. If you're already feeling confident and able to, I don't know, join your local walking football club, or go on join your local Ramblers Association, or dig in your garden, as long as you don't have any health problems that would make that a risk for you, then absolutely it doesn't need to be a cancer specific thing. But sometimes after treatment, people lose their confidence to do a few of these things and want a bit of guidance about what is safe to do, how much, when should I know, when do I know when it's starting to get too much for me, or what sort of thing might be helpful. And that's where we can step in. But you might also have health and wellbeing events and webinars at your own local hospital. You might have cancer support workers and information centres local to you that could tell you other things that are going on in your local area. I mentioned those 2 books that I think are really helpful. These are another couple of books that are for general resilience. They're not cancer specific, but I think Dr. Rangan Chatterjee is a GP in Manchester who's got a great style of, and his books are easy to read, very practical, lots of little tips. The one on the right gives you just these little 5-minute, he calls them health snacks, which are 5-minute activities to do it in different aspects of your life, mind, body, and he calls it heart, but I think he's talking about what I would call spirit, to just build your resilience overall. And the 4-pillar plan focuses on these 4 different areas: relax, eat, move, and sleep, and gives you very practical suggestions that you can work through. The World Cancer Research Fund have got a lot of resources around nutrition, and of course Macmillan have got some great resources too around all sorts of things, physical activity and psychological support. There's also, they also run a trial and support a trial called the Safe Fit Trial, which gives some personalised nutrition and physical activity support, and I'm sure Alyssa will be mentioning that more when she talks to you later on this month. So I've mentioned that our services are free, and if you can support us, that would be wonderful. You can do it via our website. But really just want to sort of say thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you enjoy exploring some of the things that you can do. How are we doing for time? There were a couple more poll things. I wanted to find out a little bit about what you have already been doing. So I don't know if I stop my share now, and maybe we run the other 2, the next poll, David, and then we do the Q&A, and then it will give me a chance to have a quick look in the Q&A and see what's going. So if you could, I'm just interested to find out about how much people have been doing and how much they've been told about the things that they could be doing to help support their own health. So if you can fill in, this one's got a few more questions, but they're quite short questions. So hopefully that would be.
We'll give just 1 minute more for this, and then we'll move on to Q&A. All right, fantastic. And I'll be closing the poll in 5 seconds.
So interestingly, most people were not told about anything they needed to do, but most people feel that they have actually done something themselves, which is great. And as I said, even just coming along to a webinar like this and has made a difference. So lots of people have been saying that they've made changes to their diet, to their physical activity levels, positive changes to their weight as well. And a few people saying they've not made any positive changes. And I think it's also really, really important to be compassionate and kind to yourselves, because sometimes in the thick of treatment or in different life situations, it's not possible or very, very difficult to make changes on your own. But reaching out for support and finding things, I feel that I've been working with people with cancer now for, gosh, scary the amount of time, sort of more, well, yeah, since I qualified really. I did medical oncology before going into general practice. And I really can confidently say, I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I've really said, with that expanded toolbox, I don't think there's anything we can do. There's always something. If you look broad enough, there's always, I feel, something that can be done to make people feel a bit more resilient in some aspect of their life. So lots of people taking supplements, and that's quite interesting. I think when we do need, supplements can be a very helpful part, but they can also be one of the things that can cause problems if people are not taking them with a good knowledge of the potential for interactions. And it is interesting that 40% of people said their oncology team were not aware of the fact that they were taking supplements. And most people aren't seeing complementary therapists. And again, that's sometimes to do with money and access, and COVID has been a big barrier to that. But if in the right setting and for the right thing, I do think that complementary therapy given by somebody else, and I think it's, again, this feeling that we don't have to do it all by ourselves, that can sometimes be really, really useful. So I'm very happy to answer questions on that. So should we close that poll then? I think that's really interesting, and I'd love to have copies of that afterwards. And should we go to the Q&A and the chat then? David, do you want to, or should I just pick them off as we're going?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so just to remind everyone, you have a couple of different options. You can either type your question in the Q&A section, or if you'd like to just raise your hand, if you'd like to actually say your question out loud, and then we can go ahead and unmute you. So
I'll just answer Ian's questions. I think they're really good. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think nobody's talking about being blind to the rocks, but I think it's that question. And I agree with you that forewarned is forearmed, and it's definitely better to be aware of some of the things that might happen or that are happening. I just think that the analogy is not that we try and ignore the rocks, but that we recognize that if we can see a rock in front of us, I often think that doctors the metaphor would go that doctors have become very good geologists. What we love to do with our tools is focus on the rock, and we chisel away at the rock with our surgery, or we try and dissolve the rock with our clever chemotherapy, or we blast the rock with our radiotherapy. But sometimes in the process of doing that, inadvertently, the background water level drops. A lot of these treatments do take a toll on us and leave us feeling less resilient. So although we've got one rock out of the way or reduced, sometimes actually then more rocks appear all around us because the water level has dropped. So I think it's an intelligent survey of the rocks that are around. We want our depth sounders to be working. Oh, that one's a bit close. I better steer away from that one. But to realize that there are two ways of approaching a rock. You can either try and remove the rock, and you can also try and look at the water level. And what I love about the integrative approach is that why not do both? Absolutely, they both work really well together. And I think the idea of, yes, we all have cancer cells, if it's only when they establish together in a clump. And I think to show up on a scan, one would need several million cells to be visible, to clump together to create a big enough thing to actually be visible. as an actual lump or a tissue, and sometimes, you know, we can pick them up on a blood test. So you're absolutely right. We don't call it cancer until enough cells have been established and are sort of maintaining themselves and are not being reduced by the immune system on its own, and that's when we call it a diagnosis of cancer. Interestingly, there are cases when we call them radical remissions, and there have been books published about this and scientific articles published about this. Sometimes people with known cancer can, without any treatment, and it's not the majority by any means, these are minority situations, but definitely documented. They definitely exist. A really interesting book by a Harvard professor called Jeff Rediger is called Cured, and studies these cases. And in that situation, it's really interesting because obviously the person did have cancer, did have enough cells to be documented, sometimes even be told, look, you've got advanced cancer, it's incurable, you're on a palliative end of life sort of trajectory. And sometimes something has happened to enable the immune system to suddenly get the other hand, kick into action, and the cancer has disappeared. And so we know that it is a balance, and that at no point does it necessarily, you know, and I think that speaks to one of the other questions that came up saying, you know, I've been given 5 years. And I don't know whether it's worth us having a quick conversation about statistics, because I think statistics are a real double-edged sword. Statistics can only tell you about whole populations. No doctor can accurately predict your exact prognosis. And many of them actually feel uncomfortable about giving any numbers because of that. But sometimes it's useful to know roughly, in this rough ballpark, people with this type of cancer and this stage of cancer, you know, roughly how long do they survive? And so often people are given an average prognosis, you know, this many people are alive at 15 years, or this many, or in your situation, the average life expectancy is this. But that includes a very wide distribution. Some people living much shorter than that, some people living much, much longer than that. And I think the things that I've been talking about are the ways that you can do what you can to ensure you are as far up that end of the statistics as possible. There are modifiable risk factors that are partly under our control. And if we do what we can to do that, we will be shifting our own personal statistics up towards the more favorable end. And that's often how we can do these things. Is that in the AntiCancer Living book that I mentioned first, the American one, is actually the sequel to a book that was called AntiCancer: A New Way of Life, published in 2008 by a doctor called Dr. David Servan-Schreiber. I think, David, you can type this in, or I'll give you the links to this. It's a really, really good book, even though it's written in 2008. Most of it still absolutely stands today. He was diagnosed with a very aggressive tumor, given a very poor prognosis. And the second chapter in that book is called Escaping Statistics. And I often recommend people who are troubled by the information and the statistics that they've been given by their oncology teams read that chapter, because it is such a helpful chapter at helping you reframe that and see that actually almost nobody actually lives according to the average. You know, the average is not the norm. It represents a big, wide spectrum, and there are things that we can do to change where we will personally land on that spectrum. So does that?
We have a couple of questions from people who've raised their hands. So Eric, I'm going to unmute you now so you can ask your question.
Unmute. There we go. Hello.
Yep, we can hear you.
I've actually answered it on the question bit anyway. So I was going to ask about hot flushes, and you've added points to follow up with. But why do things like flax seeds help? Is there one answer to that? And then it was going on to say about, would a totally vegan diet enhance the combat of this sort of cancer route?
Yeah, very good questions. I mean, flaxseed contains some, they're called phytoestrogens. If you grind them up, so they are plant-based estrogens, which do not act to actually stimulate cancer cell growth, but have a very helpful balancing effect on the hormone profile. So there are foods which contain natural plant estrogens, Actually, things like broccoli is another example of something which can help. They've shown that things like pomegranate, turmeric, and green tea can also help. And there is an interesting supplement that has been prepared, that has been kind of designed by, apologies, let me just switch it on. By a professor of oncology, by Professor Rob Thomas, the one who I mentioned had written the other book. He's actually developed a supplement specifically with prostate cancer patients in mind called Pommy Tea, which has got pomegranate, green tea, broccoli, turmeric in it, and concentrated whole food extract. So it's not an individual isolated chemical from those things. And he's actually shown that in a randomized placebo-controlled trial that men who were taking that supplement, their PSA levels were lower than the group of the people who were taking the placebo. And that has been presented at international oncology conferences and things like that. So there's quite a lot of evidence that if we can take these things as foods, they're even better for us than taking it in a concentrated supplement form. But there are lots of helpful plant chemicals that help to regulate hormone balance and that can be active in supporting our immune system and sometimes in having direct effects again in the cancer cells. And it's really interesting that the flaxseed, when men were taking 30 grams of flaxseed, ground flaxseed a day, they showed that that men who'd taken that prior to their prostatectomy had lower proliferation rates in their actual cancers, the men who were taking that. So these are only small studies and they really do need to be replicated. But again, given the low risks of taking something like flaxseed, and again, not out of balance, not in excess, anything in excess can start to have negative side effects, but a little bit of ground flaxseed to add into your diet is probably not a bad idea. Sorry, the second bit of your question was, what was the second bit of your question? Sorry.
Yeah, it was the question about being vegan.
Oh, being vegan. Sorry, of course, yes.
Does that combat cancer route? I've got an idea what you're going to say.
What do you think I'm going to say?
Well, I think you're going to say in moderation, perhaps.
I think being vegan suits some people. I think sometimes it's quite, you will probably need to take some supplements if you're vegan. It's very hard to get enough B12 as a vegan. It's very hard to get enough omega-3. These are healthy, important anti-inflammatory fats that we have in our diet. And it's quite hard for our bodies to get them from a purely vegan diet. So I would suggest that it's worth getting a bit of advice, but certainly, having less meat than your average Western diet or less animal products than your average Western diet, it seems to be healthy. And it's really a question of including those colourful veg and fruit, and generally veg more than fruit, because the fruits often have high concentrations of sugar, which can sort of throw our blood sugar levels a bit out of whack if we're just eating fruit. So vegetables, colourful vegetables and fruit rather than fruit and vegetables, if you see what I mean. But I don't think people need to be vegan, but it suits some people to be vegan. They feel better on it, but I would say need to make sure that your B12 and your omega-3 levels are good. For a lot of people, I put osteoporosis is something that a lot of men with prostate cancer need to be aware of, thinning of the bones. And many, many people in the UK are deficient in vitamin D. And I really recommend that anybody, especially with a cancer diagnosis, especially on hormone treatment, gets their vitamin D levels checked, because you know there's an epidemic in this country. The sun doesn't shine enough for most of us to get it through our skins. We can't easily get it through our diet. So I think that's an area where I really do feel that a lot of people can support themselves by getting their levels checked, and probably by taking supplements, unless you're lucky enough to have a place in the sun that you can regularly visit. Let's have a look at other questions. David, are there some?
Yeah, we have a few more. I'm conscious, obviously, that we've gone over time. So, if anyone has to leave, but if Dr. Solomon, if you have a few more minutes, why don't we take a couple more questions? Sorry that we're not going to be able to get through to everyone. So we have one from Kenneth. I'm going to unmute you now.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you. Yeah.
Hi, Kenneth.
My question is that I can't take vitamin D because of other problems. What can I take?
without knowing what the other problems are, I mean, there are different formulations of vitamin D, and so I mean, if your vitamin D levels aren't low, then that's not a problem. It's if your vitamin D levels are low, I would have thought there would be some way that you could be helped to get a good level. You can sometimes give it as an injection, you can sometimes give it, but that's a bit of a specific question. If you, without knowing a bit more about why you can't take it, it's a tricky one. If you wanted to send your question to David, I'm happy to maybe have a conversation offline about it. But if without knowing a bit more, I'd be surprised if there wasn't some way that your vitamin D levels could be optimized.
And we've got one from Billy. Billy, I'm going to let you unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hi there, we can hear you.
Yeah. My question is, Prostate Genix, a sort of pill from America, are there supplements that we can take, or they are not really any good?
Prostate Genix, is that the name of the tablet?
Yes.
I don't know. Without knowing what's in it, I wouldn't know. I mean, I think if there are, there are so many supplements out there. I think one of the things is that you really, and it's a very unregulated market out there. So first of all, you need to know that what's in the supplement is what's on the label, and you need to be careful about buying good quality products and making sure there's a certificate of analysis of these sorts of things. I think, as I've said, generally, because of that sort of factor, and because it's tricky to get the right balance of things, generally, if we can include healthy things through our food, there's really good evidence that that things through our food seem to be more supportive. So eating that broad range where we're getting colour and variety in is always my preference, and using food first. If there are particular things that are missing in your diet because you can't eat them, or because you've got a particular intolerance or something, that's when maybe the support of a nutritional therapist who can give you specific advice about specific supplements is useful. I think, a general kind of multivitamin, multi-mineral, that's where things are in kind of safe normal ranges, can be a helpful sort of top up if you find that you're eating restrictedly for a little while. But in general, supplements are exactly that. They're not a replacement for a healthy diet, and I would always start with healthy diet first. But there are a few things, as I've said, the things that I mentioned in the pommy tea, for example, that are useful to add into your diet and to include as extra sort of herbs and spices, things like turmeric, and there are lots of benefits of the sort of culinary herbs that you can add in too.
Thank you. There's good advice.
Thank you.
Shall we just do the last one? I think from Sheila's, my oncology team are dismissive of any idea that nutrition and exercise can make a difference to my well-being. Do you have any suggestions on how to deal with this?
Well, I think you could, I think the Safe Fit trial is something that's supported by Macmillan and by NHS England. And I think you could point them to that, which is exactly giving physical activity and nutrition support. I think the World Cancer Research Foundation as well, and I put their logo is on one of my slides. They produce some of the best quality evidence, international evidence update. And I think certainly for physical activity and for diet, the evidence now, I think, is undeniable if you look in the right places. There is something called the British Society for Integrative Oncology, which is a group of professionals really trying to challenge some of the kind of old style thinking that these things don't matter. I think I would usually there is somebody in the hospital, a physio or a dietitian or somebody younger. Often the next generation of people coming up are a bit more open-minded to these sorts of things. But Penny Bron as a charity was set up back in the day when that was the norm. Oncologists would just say, it doesn't make any difference. You can't, these things don't make a difference. So we are there to support people. And we have got doctors and we have got nurses. So if you need that support and you really can't get it locally, again, do tap in. Somebody's mentioned peer support, and a lot of our group sessions do give that sense of peer support of people who are trying to do something to help themselves. we have some programs which are quite small groups where people can interact with each other. Some of them are bigger online groups, and obviously we've got the one-to-ones. So I would do encourage that, but also ask around. Through your information centre, there might be cancer exercise classes, or there are often sort of initiatives through what's called social prescribing. So your GP may also know of groups that are there specifically for people with cancer.
Brilliant. And once again, thank you everyone for coming, but also a big thanks to Dr. Zollman for a really interesting talk.